Hello, Mel. So glad to see you again. What a happy surprise yesterday. Okay, today I am wearing very beautiful for your camera, Mel. First time I'm wearing this dress.
Mr. Mel, you look this...
I first met Tiu Chi-tun, who likes to be called Danny, on my third trip to Vietnam in 1994. In the last few years, she and her husband Marcel have become entrepreneurs, experiencing both the risks and rewards of emerging capitalism. In the 1970s, Marcel, then living in France, had read about Danny and her sister Tao's imprisonment for their anti-war activities in Saigon. He petitioned the South Vietnamese government for their release. I first got to know Danny and her story on a trip we took to Condau Island. She was 15 years old when first arrested. Her sister Tao was 17. For 7 years, they were held in various Vietnamese prisons, including the infamous prison on Condau Island in the South China Sea. The French named the island Pola Condor, and for almost 100 years, from 1862 to 1954, it was a penal colony. Over 20,000 Vietnamese died there. After the French were expelled, the South Vietnamese government took control of the island until 1975.
First, they put down lime, and after they put water. They don't put only one. So the lime with the water burn the skin. Every hole of the skin, little hole. In every hole there is a drop of blood. The guards in tiger cages was very, very wicked, very.
Danny told me that most of the guards were not military guards, but civilian criminals. We are of the same generation, Danny and I, but it's nearly impossible for me to comprehend her experiences and memories. I grew up in a small tavern in Wisconsin. My world was shaped around annual sporting events, like spearing 100-pound sturgeons, or hearing stories from the guys who shot lead slugs into deer.
For a late film report on Vietnam countrywide, here is NBC News correspondent Jack Perkins in Tokyo by satellite.
Vietnam was, to me, a television war. A war we must have been winning because the number of enemy dead was always higher than the number of American dead on the nightly scoreboard. Then one day, and I remember it was a cold, rainy day, I saw my cousin dressed in an army uniform. I peered at him through a glass-covered casket. He didn't look dead, but his mother and father did. I'll never forget my aunt's empty expression as she received the folded flag. Several years later, my high school football coach, who was also the history teacher, told us we needed to go to Vietnam and kill those gooks. I joined the Navy 2 weeks after high school. a little more than a month after we airlifted out of the embassy in '75. Most of the post-Vietnam enlistees on my nuclear submarine had inherited a distrust of authority cultivated during that war. Pink Floyd and pot allowed us to ignore the reality that we carried the destructive equivalent of over 600 Hiroshimas. Our weapons were called counter-value, which meant they destroyed what people valued most, their lives.
Vietnam syndrome once and for all.
Bush's comment after the war felt like a bad song stuck in my head. What the hell did it mean, kicking the Vietnam syndrome? So in 1991, I went to Vietnam. It turned out to be the first of 5 trips I would make between 1992 and 1997. But I didn't know that then, and I certainly didn't know that such an absurd statement would stick with me for such a long time.
And by God, we've kicked Vietnam syndrome.
In Hanoi, I met a veteran of the American War, Mr. Nguyen Nop Hum. He told me about some of his comrades who packed Hemingway and Twain for the extended foot journey down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Others took with them guitars and notebooks to jot down love poems to their sweethearts back in Hanoi. Poisonous snakes, malaria, and the B-52s killed many of them, including Hum's brother. I asked him what kind of film he thought should be made about the war, from the Vietnamese perspective. At first he seemed as perplexed by the question as I was about why I had asked it. Finally he said, "Vietnamese women have endured so much. Their stories of war have yet to be told." The Vietnamese told me that thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of women took part in the wars against France, the government of South Vietnam, and the United States, either by organizing political struggles or through direct military resistance. At least 30 U.S. jets were shot down in North Vietnam by the Women's Self-Defense Corps during the course of the war. U.S. military leaders estimated that in some parts of South Vietnam, as much as 29% of the guerrilla force was female. These women were not drafted. Most of them were not driven by political ideology. They resisted in an effort to protect family, home, country. revolutionary syndrome in Vietnam is very old, part of a cultural inheritance as powerful as stories of our triumphant American colonists and the doughboy and GI saviors of the two world wars. American boys of my generation grew up with patriotic mythical figures, usually portrayed by John Wayne, who conquered frontiers with fists and Winchesters. Vietnamese women have the Trunk Sisters instead, who in 40 AD led a successful rebellion against Chinese rule. More than 20 Vietnamese women are recorded as military leaders in the 1st century alone. To know the Vietnamese women is to understand their long history of protective activism. I learned that this revolutionary activism was passed on to each generation. Danny introduced me to Vo Thi Chi and her daughter Lê Hong Quan, both of whom had inherited a legacy of revolution. Danny first met the daughter in 1968 in a prison outside of Saigon. Quan told me that Danny had slashed her wrist in protest to keep the guards from killing Quan after 3 other female prisoners were killed. Danny explained to them that I was an American filmmaker, interested in Vietnamese women's stories of war. Mrs. Chi told me that she took up the struggle against the French from 1945 through 1954. During that time, her father was arrested 17 times, her uncle was beheaded, and her sister permanently crippled by severe beatings. Quan joined the local guerrilla force when she was 18. From 1963 until 1966, she was with the National Liberation Front, known to most Americans as the Viet Cong guerrillas.
Và cho đến cuối 65 đầu 66 thì chị được điều động lên nội thành Sài Gòn. Tức là xây dựng lực lượng biệt động nội thành nữ. Chứ còn Sài Gòn có rất nhiều cái cụm biệt động, có nhiều đơn vị biệt động. Nhưng trong này đơn vị này đó là sau này á, nó là cái đơn vị nữ hoàn toàn. Nhưng mà có một chút cái vui là đơn vị nữ nhưng mà có chiến sĩ nam. Là vì gặp người tốt á, thì chị cũng mời anh em nam vào luôn, tổ chức vào.
In May of 1968, in an effort to create a diversion that might allow their comrades to escape, she and one companion purposely revealed their location to South Vietnamese forces. After 2 hours, their ammunition depleted, they volleyed back the live grenades thrown at them by the Army troops. Shrapnel ripped through Quan's arm, tearing off her hand. She looked at it several feet away and contemplated removing the ring given to her by her mother, but thought, why bother? I'll be dead anyway. She was captured and interrogated.
Rồi là khi họ bắt lại là họ ngay cả cái tay như thế này nó đang mở tung ra vậy mà họ không garo đâu, họ đem vô một cái ti đặc biệt 2 á, hỏi cung gần 2 tiếng đồng hồ, xong đưa qua ở bên bệnh viện Sài Gòn á. Nhưng mà cái tình trạng là vậy, và chỉ cưa cái tay này thôi, còn tất cả những cái vết thương khác là không xử lý gì. Cưa cái tay này và khâu cái vết thương chỗ này, vết thương chỗ này như là gãy xương, còn tất cả những cái mảnh ở dưới chân lẽ ra lúc đó có thể cho ben vào gấp ra được, cho ben vào gấp ra được, nhưng mà họ không xử lý. Thắt garo tức là cột cái tay này lại và chuyển liền qua chợ rẫy, qua chợ quán chuyển liền qua chợ rẫy. Và sau đó thì 7 giờ sáng là đã đánh vào đây để mà khảo cung, để hỏi những cái câu hỏi mà họ cần. Vỡ xương tay này liền. Em cái cách làm sao đó em nói để cho anh hiểu được là mà ở chỗ này là chỗ đó là đang huấn luyện cách tra tấn.
Tù Việt Nam, ẩm tù Việt Nam. Là trong cái chỗ đó là có Mỹ đó hả chị?
Có Mỹ.
Quan went into detail on the methods of her torture, drowning with water called the submarine, being hung from the arms until you felt your armpits would snap, she described as the airplane. I noticed my camera was running out of videotape and figured she would soon end, but she continued to describe torture by dagger sticks, electric shock, and chemical injections. Some minutes later, my video ran out, but I didn't notice anymore. We were all crying together. 3 months after Quan's capture, her mother was arrested, and both were sent to Con Dao prison. The nightmares still continue for Quan. Sometimes she doesn't recognize her husband, accusing him and her mother of torturing her. The emotional intimacy that Quan, Chi, and Danny offered would have been unimaginable during my first interviews in 1992. The fact that my film crew and I were independent filmmakers without Hollywood money was difficult to convey to the Vietnamese, almost as difficult as trying to explain it to my family in Wisconsin. Most Vietnamese believe that all Americans are rich, hard to refute considering the fact that the cost of our camera gear, airfare, and stay in Vietnam equal a 30-year income for most Vietnamese families. We accompanied a University of Utah study group, and we were all led by our Vietnamese sponsors through the country, from meeting to meeting, from tourist attraction to tourist attraction, from tea ceremony to tea ceremony, from tea ceremony to tea ceremony. As if by illusion, women would appear, as I had requested, all dressed perfectly in their aoyais, describing horrors of war in flat tones, picking children's flesh off tree limbs after a village had been bombed, or the old mother who had been tortured during both the French and American wars.
Và cái đoàn kết của hai nước rất là yêu cầu lớn.
We wish the friendship between America and Vietnam more stronger, and in future we can receive some women from America come to our country to visit our house.
Each interview finished with offerings of small gifts or group photos. We came away with an obscure village's lifetime of stories, collapsed into an hour. Then on to the next negotiated interview. The women we talked to were handpicked by our hired government official, who remained always within earshot, occasionally reminding the women to tone down anything that might be controversial. Reconciliation was a redundant topic, and the government was more interested in ending the long American embargo than in opening up old war wounds to satisfy the curiosity of an American filmmaker. Our naivete about the convoluted Vietnamese bureaucracy led to mounting frustration in the sense that we were being blocked from any path we wanted to take. With no other clear alternative, I agreed to go on a tour of Coconut Island. During the war, a monk, known as the Coconut Monk, retreated to the island to meditate the war away. Now there was no more monk, no one to interview, no nothing that had anything to do with the film I had in mind. While sightseeing more coconuts on the island, we were told by our government sponsor that the women war veterans were gathering in Ho Chi Minh City for their annual convention. We would miss it by one day. So I had to find a way to come back to Vietnam for the next reunion. Seeing this group of women lifted a year of frustration. Many of the older ones were teenagers when they joined the popular movement against the French in the 1930s.
Bởi vì thấy những cái người hay là địa chủ thì làm ít lại ăn nhiều, còn những người nông dân làm nhiều lại là thuốc lúa thóc không có. Mà lúc đó tôi ở chùa nên thì tôi bất công vậy đó. Mà khi gặp chủ nghĩa cộng sản ấy, thì thấy nó rất là gần với những cái nhà tu, nên tôi ham mộ mà tôi đi theo.
Do đó nè, mà từ 10 tuổi, 11 tuổi là tôi đã biết làm công tác giao thông và rồi trong những người mà tham gia mà khởi nghĩa mà chống công năng hồi xưa đã có những hình ảnh của người phụ nữ như bà Trương, bà Triệu, thì là tôi rất say mê những hình ảnh đó, rồi biết làm sao mình lớn lên.
Khi mà xe tăng á, càn vô ruộng, vô vườn, vô rẫy của đồng bào đó, thì bà con ra nằm ở dưới đầu xe, rồi lôi kéo, nói tại sao làm vậy, đừng có làm vậy, rồi đói.
Women were the principal organizers of village protests in the South. In 1963, they mobilized 45,000 people to demonstrate against the American-aided South Vietnamese government troops. General Nguyen Thi Dinh was Deputy Chief of the Liberation Armed Forces of the South and the primary leader of this women's movement, known as the Long-Haired Army. Some estimates say it was 2 million strong in 1967. Like Dinh herself, most women who joined the movement have been brought up as peasant farmers in the Mekong Delta. Nguyen Thi Dinh died in 1992. Dr. Hoa was Minister of Health for the People's Revolutionary Government during the war and a close friend to General Dinh.
And it is very strange because you have in one hand, you have a peasant and in one hand an intellectual. At the beginning, Jean have said to me, it is impossible for us to understand. She cannot understand me, and I cannot understand her. But it is false. It is wrong. We were very closely linked, and I love very much Nguyen Thi Dinh. For me, Jean, morally, Jean was a very ideal woman. She was very courageous, very generous, very intelligent. I was involved in the revolution at the beginning, yeah? Because my family was revolutionary. My father was a revolutionary, and he has taught to us to be always to love our country. I think during the war, our choice was right, because the Communist Party effectively was the leader of for the fight for the independence. Because I want the independence of my people, and I was convinced, and I am convinced, that the independence must have the signification of a better life and the happiness of your people. It is very utopic, it is very idealist. But I think that in your life, if you don't have any ideal, you cannot live. You cannot survive.
Danny and her sister Tao were well educated and went to French schools. Danny was 10 when she was first arrested for protesting the actions of the South Vietnamese government. Their anti-war activism began in the early 1960s.
You know, we began the student movement very early, in '63. It's very difficult to separate the action of the BC and the action of the patriotic students. And at that time, what means patriotism? Means that the country free of any invaders, foreign invaders. In '64, you attempt to burn yourself.
Yes.
At the protest against the war, the American war. Then at 11 years old, she attempted to burn herself at the Ấn Quan pagoda, and she has poured oil on her body, and but she was discovered by the venerable of the pagoda, so they prevented her to switch the match. They explained to my mother that you have a very great daughter. She was very young, but she has a good ideology. She protests against the war.
The sisters escalated their involvement by joining the student movement against the war. 4 years after Danny attempted self-immolation, the sisters decided to plant a bomb in Saigon's police headquarters.
Because U.S. Army was coming to our country with a lot of weapons, bombs, airplanes, and so on. And we, what do we have? Anything? But a minimum what we can have, it's to get bombs, and inside it we put a lot of pellets. 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 We put inside the bomb, to make more
damage.
more damages for the enemies. And we were sure that we can make damage, sure and sure.
Did you know that the CIA was in the police headquarters?
Yeah.
That was the reason, or was the reason because it was the police headquarters?
Both.
Both. The Vietnamese policemen, they are the tools of the U.S. CIA.
The bomb was found by police and never did explode. Danny and Tao were captured and taken to police headquarters where one of Saigon's higher-ranking intelligence officers interrogated them.
He asked me, you want to imitate the sister Trưng, Hai Bà Trưng, you know? Because we are two sisters. I didn't answer, and I smiled to him. And he continued, why do you do this? Huh? You are so silly. Only the poor people, only the proletariat, they join the VC. But you are in a wealthy family. You live in the city, and you go to a French school. You are not repressed by us. You are well treated by this regime. So you must back this regime. Why do you do this? So I tell him that because I don't want the presence of the GIs in the city and in South Vietnam. He say, oh, you know one side, but you are too young. You don't know the other side.
After interrogation, they were beaten and tortured. For the next 6 years, Danny and Tao were moved through various prisons, including the tiger cages on Con Dao.
I didn't got what I deserve. What I deserve is to be respected, to be loved, because I didn't do anything wrong. I love my country. I protect my country. The American invaders, they come to my country. They do bad things to our people. I must resist. So what I do is not wrong. It's right. They treat me not as human, but as beast in the prison.
The 16-hour boat ride leaves the mainland weekly. with supplies to replenish the small town that is mostly a fishing port. The trip was a reunion for Danny and her Vietnamese companions. All of them had been prisoners on the island. Miss Tu An returned with her daughter. She had not been to the island since her release in 1975. Miss Nut had been a liberation commando. It would be her first time back as well. In 1970, there was close to 10,000 Vietnamese prisoners in the 6 prison complexes on Con Dao. Over 600 of them were women. Like most Vietnamese women I met, Miss Nut had inherited the revolution from her family. Some of them were killed during the French War. She began her revolutionary career with the student movement and was arrested in 1966. She was moved through several prison complexes over the course of 7 years.
This is the bathroom for the prisoners.
Sometimes the women would be shackled to leg irons on the concrete bed or floor. During the hot summer months, up to 6 women occupied each cell. The guards put tarps over the top of the cells to cut off air circulation. The women would sing to communicate to one another and to comfort others who were beaten and tortured.
Rồi nếu mà mình cứ hát hò giỡn vui rồi này kia đó là nó cấm không có cho tắm. Rồi rốt cuộc rồi đến bị vì 5 người mà như vậy thì hết dễ hết quần áo rồi thì bắt đầu mới lấy cái dĩa giấu là nó đem dĩa vô nó đựng thức ăn cho ăn, nó mới giấu là một cái dĩa thì đứa nó không cho tắm, có một đợt nó cấm 53 ngày không được tắm.
If they were not allowed to bathe, the prisoners would collect the perspiration from their bodies to cleanse themselves. Miss Nut also recalled how they would catch the occasional gecko lizard to put in the thin soup they were given each day and let the prisoner who was in the worst physical condition, either from illness, malnutrition, or beatings, gain the added protein. Dead birds were used for the same purpose. Prisoners were often moved from one complex to another. I counted 8 of these prison cells in one compound. On this day, the temperature exceeded 100 degrees inside. Between 80 and 100 women lived in this particular cell, all having to share one shallow latrine that ventilated inside the room. Miss Tu An was 20 when she was arrested for her student anti-war activities and given a 20-year sentence. She was in this cell for 1 year until the prison was liberated in 1975.
Đó cũng sau hiệp định Paris, chỉ trong một cuộc đàn áp mà thôi ở bên trại ở khu B của trại 6 này đó, thì chết một lúc 5 người và 202 người bị thương trong một cuộc đàn áp.
202 people were invalid, were wounded.
Thì em sẽ cố nhớ được cái bài hát tới đâu em hát cho các anh chị nghe.
I would like to sing a song for you when we capture in this sense.
Biết không anh lòng em đau thương uất bên cửa sắt đã đau đàn áp quân thù vang trời côn đảo rằng nghiến rằng bầm ruột tim gàng quân ra mang tàn sát dã man đợi người ngất rồi lối bừa đi một người chết rồi 5 người chết khi đất nước hoan hô hòa bình khi đất nước thân yêu đợi chờ anh về một người chết rồi 5 người chết khi đất nước thân yêu đợi chờ anh về biết không anh lòng em đau thương uất bên cửa sắt đã đau đàn áp quân thù vang trời côn đảo rằng nghiến rằng bầm ruột tim gàng quân ra mang tàn sát dã man đợi người ngất rồi lối bừa đi một người chết rồi 5 người chết khi đất nước hoan hô hòa bình khi đất nước thân yêu đợi chờ anh về.
In 1970, Don Luce, an American agricultural economist working with Vietnamese humanitarian organizations, led an American congressional delegation to Con Dao. The prison was maintained by South Vietnamese authorities with the assistance of a U.S. public safety officer. Luce and his delegation were the first Westerners to document seeing the tiger cages since the time of the French. They reported prisoners suffering from TB and gross infections that resulted from chronic beatings. Danny and Tao were in the cages, and Danny recalls seeing the Americans.
When we see American men, and they look very nice, not ugly, divine. So, and we have spoken. And they ask us our address in Saigon, and we have given them the address. And so after they have visited my mother. Yes, and from the Don Luce has eating meal.
With your mother?
Yes, in our house. Yeah.
The American official on the island told the delegation that they had no right to interfere with Vietnamese affairs and insisted that prison standards on Con Dao were equal to many of the prisons in the United States. The women were eventually moved from the tiger cages to these larger cells.
My sister and I was lying in this spot, about the middle of this, yes, with a steel bar on the leg.
How long in the steel bar?
Every day, and for about 1 year.
Hồi đó mẹ ở chỗ nào mà? Mẹ thì tôi nằm trong đó.
Oh, I don't want to think anything because too hard for my mind. So I don't think not anything. I make my head empty because it's so hard. I try to smile, so to smile, and so I cannot cry. This friend, she is very, very pretty. One of the prettiest girl in the prison with us. And she danced very, very good. And before her death, he asked the other prisoners to cover her with cái mảnh khăn voan mà cô dùng để mà múa. She used to dance in the prison for us.
3 of their friends are among the 20,000 Vietnamese who died in the prisons of Con Dao. These women are the only recorded prisoner deaths on the island during the American War. One other woman buried here is Vo Thi Sao. She was executed by the French on this island in 1952 for rebelling against French authority and killing French soldiers. She was 16 years old. School children still read about her in history books. Like other Vietnamese heroines, streets are named for her throughout Vietnam.
Sông núi vẫn nhắc tên người anh hùng đã chết cho đời sau. Chỉ
Though Danny's relationship with Vo Thi Sao was purely spiritual, she knew of one man on the island who had seen Vo Thi Sao before she was executed. He had never allowed his story to be recorded because he said the younger generation no longer cares for such things. When we arrived at his house, he told us it was a strange fate, that an American had to travel all this way to get him to speak about Vo Thi Sao.
Quan trọng cái vụ chuyện đó, nhưng mà cũng phải nhớ từ chi tiết. Nhớ mà tới bữa đi bắn thôi.
He tells that the event of Vo Thi Sao is a souvenir, so deep that he cannot forget. Rồi chú bà nói tiếp đi chú bà. Tới chỗ này chỗ hấp dẫn. Her wife is afraid if something could happen to him if he continued to speak. But he tells that no, this was a real event. It was a truth, so I speak.
Mr. Wei's wife was concerned that we didn't come with the proper government authorities for her husband to tell the story. Although she disapproved, he continued. Employed by the French as a barge worker, he saw French soldiers with Vo Thi Sao on his barge, but did not know she was a prisoner until he heard about her execution from a Catholic priest who had been there. Danny continued to press for more details, searching for a way to identify more completely with her heroine. Danny told me that Vo Thi Sao requested 3 things before her death: to remove the blindfold, to sing the national anthem, and to drink a bowl of water.
We, the Vietnamese people, we know that in Vietnamese, water and country have the same noun. Water and country, same noun. You understand? So she wanted to drink a big bowl of water, meaning that Vo Thi Sao wanted to have all the country in her body before her death. They didn't accept these conditions, but only one condition. They explained that it's the rules that you have to be blind before your death. Not accept this condition. To sing a national hymn, not accept, because we are against you, against your country, not accept. And only one condition we accept, then your big and full bowl of water. You can drink as you want, because you know Samuel. They don't understand the meaning of this what Sao think. So only water to Vo Thi Sao before kill her. Do you remember? I was only 16 years old, like you, when I was deported in this island. So, you listen to me, I sing for you. Mùa hoa lê kim ma nở ở ở quê ta miền đất đó, thôn xóm vẫn nhắc tên người anh hùng đã chết cho mùa hoa lê kim ma nở. Đời sau vẫn còn nhắc nhớ sông núi đất nước ơn người anh hùng đã chết cho đời sau. Người thiếu nữ ấy như mùa xuân chỉ đã dâng cả cuộc đời.
You have new the society of consumption, and you know that the money is not the only factor of the happiness, and you are finding something else. But I am sure that you don't know exactly what you are trying to find. You are trying to find a meaning to your life.
I don't regret about my struggle in the past, but now in the actual situation of our country, I am worried. A lot of factories are built in Vietnam by foreigners company, and a lot of workers, Vietnamese local workers, are spending their life in these factories. I am feeling that a new modern class of slaves is built, and a new exploitation for our people is happen. It's happened.
I can work for a foreign company and earn 10 times more than my salary, my actual salary. But I always cling to the government administration to continue working for the government is, for me, a new form of sacrifice.
I know that the history never come back in the same way, the same. But if the history renew, I would have the same reaction, and I will I will begin again.
A Vietnamese proverb states, when you open a door for new winds to come in, dust will come in too. Dr. Wah told me that the young generation reminds her of the American icon James Dean. They like the noise, they like the danger, they like the trouble, and they like what money can buy them. The war is, for them, a distant history. For many Vietnamese women, it is not a question of doing it all over again, as Danny says, but of resolving the events of the American War. More than 300,000 Vietnamese are still listed as missing in action. They have no advocates except their mothers, their wives, their families, their friends. Most of the women I interviewed feel no animosity towards Americans. In fact, they feel a strong connection to the American families who had also suffered in the war. At the end of our emotional interview, I asked Kwan and her mother, Mrs. Chi, what they wanted to say to Americans.
Mother tells that all mothers, all Vietnamese mothers have a good comprehension towards American mothers having their sons sent in the war to Vietnam. They tell that you are the bridge between us and other Americans. She gave all best wishes to your mother and to all your brothers and sisters.
How ironic that a former Viet Cong guerrilla had to remind me of family values. I certainly have been thinking much more about my family in Vietnam since the Vietnamese insisted that I give them their best. My mother took most of these pictures. She was always the woman with the movie camera, recording, preserving, reminding us of the reality of family. So looking at the pictures now makes me re-examine all the forces that shaped me and led me to the stories of these women struggling to preserve their culture against invading forces. I feel that in our male-dominated society, progress is more important than preservation. The politics we play, the careers we pursue, the money we earn, all can be counted and quantified. But experiences, relationships, images, wisdom, these elude us again almost as soon as we try to communicate them. We all struggle day by day to preserve the integrity of our personal stories against the tide of history. A slogan, a simplistic catchphrase, the Vietnam Syndrome, first brought me to Vietnam. But the faces of these women and their complex, unresolved stories draw me back. Stay with me, wherever I am.